I had just finished an evening shift, and I enjoyed the walk home under a magnificent, almost full moon that dimly illuminated my path ahead. In my hand, I held a bottle of Bordeaux, excited for dinner prepared by my wife, Sarah. She had already left me a text saying that she had almost finished up, and that my dog eagerly awaited my arrival, tapping around on the floor in our home, wondering what took me so long. The road home took me past a riding school, with about a dozen horses spending their night in the adjacent fenced-in field. I frequently stopped by to feed them a snack, carrots or apples mostly, and as such, we had formed a sort of a friendship. But something seemed off that evening. Usually, the curious creatures would come trotting over, ecstatic if they noticed me carrying food. But instead of their neighing greetings, they ignored me, their eyes transfixed by the bright moon above. I tried the usual clicking sound to attract their attention, but they didn't even take note of my presence. And after a moment of staring up at the sky, in a futile attempt at figuring out what they found so damn interesting, I gave up and I continued home. My dog, Hugo, a massive Labrador who still acted as a lapdog, excitedly jumped up to greet me as I walked in through the door. He almost knocked me to the ground, barely allowing me to save the bottle of wine that I held. Sarah quickly came to my aid, hopelessly trying to pull him off, an almost impossible feat once Hugo had entered his aggressive cuddle mode. But after a few wet licks and some paw marks on my off-white shirt, he calmed down thanks to the temptation of a promised dog snack if he behaved. The horses were acting weird tonight, I said with a mouthful of pork chop. What do you mean, weird? Sarah asked. They completely ignored me, just stared up at the moon. She gave me a concerned look before glancing over at Hugo. That's odd. The same thing happened as I took the dog out for some fresh air, just before you got back home. You wouldn't stop staring up at the sky. I had to drag him back in with me. Well, that's different. Hugo is clearly an idiot, I said as I gestured to our dog, laying with his snout half submerged in his water bowl, producing bubbles with each breath. Sarah giggled and we went about our dinner, doing our best to enjoy our weekly date night with wine, dinner, and a boring movie. The next evening following work, I once again passed by the riding school, this time making sure I carried with me a bag of irresistible goods for the majestic horses. I figured they had been sulky last night since I had passed without a worthy offer, yet they still stared up at the moon. I stood by their fence for a few minutes, clicking at them, holding out tasty carrots, even throwing some at their feet. They just kept staring, their attention locked at the shiny, celestial body above us. Eventually, it started to get cold and I headed back home. As I arrived, I found Hugo standing in our garden, his eyes fixed at the sky, with Sarah desperately trying to drag him inside, all the while spouting profanities at our massive idiot, but he refused to budge. Sarah, what's going on? This dummy won't come back inside, she panted as she pulled at his leash with all of her force. I bent down to pet Hugo, hoping some love would convince him to move his chubby behind. He growled at me as soon as I reached out my hand. Shocked at his sudden change in attitude, I bent down to try again, but instead of his cuddly self, he bit me. Hugo bit me. Though it wasn't a very hard bite, one that didn't even break the skin, it was still the first time that he had had any sort of aggressive behavior towards us, or anyone for that matter. He had always been a peaceful, if not a bit docile creature. In anger, I grabbed his collar and I started dragging him back inside the house. All the while, he barked and growled in defiance. We put him into his travel cage for the night and locked the door, so we could lay there and think about what he had done. We went to bed angry, discussing what to do about Hugo's sudden outburst. Call the veterinarian, enroll him in classes, or just take it as a one-time event. He had always been the most loving being, so something was definitely off. And then as we awoke in the morning, ready to give our dumb dog another chance, we found him laying still in his cage. He always, without fail, jumped up once he heard our footsteps approaching him in the morning. But in that particular day, he just lay there. "Hey boy, wake up," I said as I opened the door. But he still wouldn't move. It didn't take long for the realization to hit me. Hugo was dead. He had passed at some point during the night, only 7 years of age. We cried as we embraced his limp body in our arms. He had been a large dog, but he had never felt that heavy, reduced to a furry bag of meat with no personality inside. I called in sick to work, but my wife didn't get the chance as they were understaffed. After she left unwillingly, I took the time to bury Hugo in the garden, telling them that I forgave him for biting me, that he was the best dog that anybody could ever have, and that I loved him. Following the burial, at 10 in the morning, I cracked open a beer and decided to watch some television. Any distraction was a welcome gift. I flipped through the channels filled with daytime crap, until I stumbled upon a local news segment regarding the riding school, the very same one that I passed every day to and from work. During the night, all of their 16 horses had fallen over dead, and just like with Hugo, there was no apparent cause. It was like they had just stopped living out of sheer willpower. I knew that it had to be related, and feared the horses might have died from some sort of infection, maybe one that I had carried home with me and transferred to Hugo. Feeling more than a bit guilty, and with limited medical knowledge, I called the veterinarian, half sobbing as I asked if I had somehow killed my own dog. The woman on the other end of the line sounded tired, exhausted from an overnight shift, and explained that no disease would carry over from equines to canines with a healthy human as the carrier. She continued to say that it was a citywide situation, with pets and local wildlife falling over dead, and nobody could fathom why. Due to this, the city was about to order all pets to be kept inside while they could assess the situation, but for us, it was all too late. Sarah came home in the evening from an overtime shift. Apparently quite a few of her coworkers hadn't turned up for work, even without calling in sick, and she had to stay behind to pick up the slack. She had brought flowers for Hugo's grave, and while she took a few moments to say goodbye, I cooked up some dinner, hoping to brighten the mood ever so slightly. As the pasta reached the perfect al dente consistency, and the sauce simmered in the pan, I realized that Sarah still hadn't come back in. I walked out into the garden to find Sarah at Hugo's grave, but she wasn't there to say farewell. She simply stared up at the moon, unmoving, no care as to what was happening around her. "Sarah, what are you doing?" I asked, concerned. She didn't respond. "Sarah, come on," I said, my voice getting louder as I walked over to her. Still no response. I grabbed her shoulder, which caused her to violently flinch in shock, as if I had snuck up behind her to scare her. She seemed frazzled, but at least I got her attention. "Oh shit, I'm sorry. I kind of spaced out there for a second. Is dinner ready?" "Yeah. What were you looking at, Sarah?" "What do you mean?" "You were staring up at the sky, just like Hugo," I said calmly, as I realized how stressed out she seemed. No, I just zoned out. She trailed off. "It's alright, Sarah. Let's just eat." We finished dinner in silence and went to bed without discussing Hugo, nor what had happened to my wife. Something about her felt different, broken, but I couldn't decide whether she had seen something in the sky, or if she was just distraught from the loss of our dog. I twisted and turned in bed that night, unable to rest, drifting in and out of consciousness, a dreamless sleep filled with nothing but worry. At some point, I reached out my arm and realized Sarah's part of the bed was vacant, a realization that quickly jolted me awake. After running through the house, calling out for her, I caught a glimpse of someone standing out in the garden, staring up at the sky. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing?" I yelled as I ran over to her, ready to drag her back inside, but before I could even reach her, she collapsed to the ground. "Sarah!" I ran over to check on her, and though she was still alive, I couldn't get her to regain consciousness. Without further hesitation and with trembling hands, I called 911, impatiently waiting for a response. It rang for a full minute, and there was no one on the other end to respond to my call. 2 minutes and then 3, and at the 4th minute of waiting without an answer, I hung up, deciding I would drive her to the hospital on my own. I sped through our little town, noticing a few passed out people laying on the side of the street, all in various states of undress. Nightgowns, naked, fully clothed. Whatever the situation, something was terribly wrong. As we arrived at the hospital and pulled into the drop-off meant for ambulances, I was shook by the oddly silent atmosphere surrounding the area. Only a single doctor came out to assess the situation. "Where is everyone?" I asked as I carried my unconscious wife out of the car. The doctor looked stressed but not surprised, clearly overwhelmed by whatever had been happening during the night. He quickly looked over to my wife, checking for any signs of consciousness. "Come on," he finally said. "Let's get her inside." The hospital seemed devoid of any staff, only operated by a minute skeleton crew. But despite the scanty help, the lobby itself had been filled to the brim with hospital beds, stretchers and wheelchairs, all occupied by other unconscious people. "What's happening here?" I asked as we struggled to find a free bed. We don't know. Half the staff simply didn't show up for work, and the rest are acting strangely, refusing to stop staring up at the moon. It doesn't make any sense." He pointed to a few nurses and doctors running from patient to patient, desperately trying to figure out what ailed them. "This is all we have left," he said. My wife, is she going to, will she be alright?" I asked. The doctor didn't answer. It was beyond what any of them had ever dealt with, and it clearly showed. Our town had been ravaged by an impossible, senseless disease with an unknown cause. I sat with my wife for hours, and by some stroke of luck, we managed to find her a room occupied by only 5 other patients, all apparently suffering from the same condition, none awakening from their forced slumber. After a while, I decided to get some fresh air. I needed to think, to come up with a solution. And at almost 3 in the morning, I ventured outside for a cigarette, a habit that I had quit years earlier. But desperate times call for desperate measures. On my way, one of the doctors stopped me. "Where are you going?" "Out for a smoke. Why?" He shook his head in frustration, as tired and burned out as the others. "Just don't look at the sky, all right?" I nodded and I walked outside, staring at my feet for each step. As I inhaled the toxic smoke, I felt a smidge less horrified, and after 3 cigarettes, I forgot why I ever quit. I firmly kept my eyes at the ground, the ambulances, the buildings, anything but the sky. Alas, in the window of the entrance, I saw the reflection of our bright lunar body, and that was all it took. I looked up at the moon. It had been the one that transfixed the animals, my wife, and probably all the other people suffering. During the past few days, I've spent a lot of time looking up at it, wondering what kind of mysteries had driven people from their health and sanity. And then for the first time, I noticed something different. They hadn't been staring at the moon at all, but at something beside it, something new. Next to the moon hung a massive black sphere, only visible due to the illuminated outline created as the moonlight reflected off it. I could only barely see it, but nevertheless, there it was, growing ever so slightly with each passing minute. I should have been horrified. I should have ran back into the hospital, but I couldn't. It was just too beautiful, perfectly spherical, with shades of black surrounding its ever-growing aura. It was hypnotic. I couldn't stop looking at it. Hours passed and the moon descended below the horizon, replaced by a glowing orb of sunshine, taking the magnificent sphere with it. I only then realized that I had stared, unblinking and unmoving at the object in the sky for the entire night, and it made me feel happy. I had spent the night unwillingly staring at the moon. My wife is still unconscious, but it no longer worries me. My only priority is that incredible sphere. Whatever it is, something awakened within me when I first laid my eyes upon it, and I know in my heart when nightfall comes, I won't be strong enough to resist looking up into the sky to look for that black sphere. That's why I'm writing this now, while I'm still myself. Whatever you do, when night creeps over your home like a blanket of darkness, stay inside. Don't look up at the sky. Hug your family, enjoy your life, because whatever that sphere is, it's growing in size and it's getting closer.